At 11:47 p.m., Harold Chen was just another tired casino dealer shuffling cards for drunk high rollers. At 11:48 p.m., 5 armed men burst through the Belmont Casino doors. At 11:52 p.m., all 5 robbers were down, and Harold was calmly asking security to call an ambulance. The gamblers couldn't understand how an old man moved that fast. The answer was buried in a classified CIA file. The Belmont Casino in downtown Las Vegas had seen its share of characters, but Harold Chen wasn't one of them. At 64, the Chinese-American dealer was invisible furniture, the kind of employee who blended into the background like wallpaper. For 3 years, he'd sat at the same blackjack table, dealing cards with the methodical precision of a man who had long ago accepted his place in the world. The high rollers barely acknowledged his existence. To them, Harold was just the slow Asian dealer, the old man with thick glasses who shuffled cards with deliberate, careful movements that drove impatient gamblers crazy. "Hey, Chen, can you pick up the pace?" Marcus Wellington, the third, sneered from across the felt table, his Rolex catching the casino lights as he gestured dismissively. The tech billionaire had been drinking heavily and losing badly, which made him even more obnoxious than usual. "Some of us have real money to win here." The other players at the table chuckled. There was Amanda Cross, a hedge fund manager who treated everyone like servants; Viktor Petrov, a Russian oligarch's son who spoke about Harold as if he weren't there; and James Morrison, a pharmaceutical CEO who had once loudly wondered if Harold even spoke English. "Of course, Mr. Wellington," Harold replied softly, his accent barely noticeable after 40 years in America. He dealt the next hand with the same steady rhythm he'd maintained for 3 years. To the players, it looked like the mechanical movements of a man whose mind had checked out long ago. But Harold's mind was anything but checked out. Behind those thick glasses, sharp eyes were constantly scanning, analyzing, cataloging. Every face that entered his peripheral vision, every unusual movement, every person who didn't belong. Old habits from a different life, a different identity that he'd buried so deep that sometimes he almost forgot it himself. Harold Chen hadn't always been a casino dealer. 25 years ago, he'd been Agent Harrison Chen, CIA Special Activities Division, with a specialty in deep cover operations in hostile territory. He'd spent 15 years in places where a wrong move meant death, where blending in wasn't a job skill but a survival necessity. But that was before Beijing, before the operation that went sideways, before he'd watched his entire team die because of intelligence that turned out to be wrong, before he'd spent 8 months in a Chinese military prison where they'd done things to him that still woke him up in cold sweats. When the CIA finally extracted him, Harold Chen was a broken man. The agency offered him a desk job, a pension, counseling, but all Harold wanted was to disappear, to become nobody special, nobody important, nobody worth noticing. Las Vegas, with its transient population and endless stream of strangers, seemed like the perfect place to vanish. For 3 years, it had worked perfectly. He dealt cards, collected his modest paychecks, went home to his small apartment, and tried not to remember what it felt like to matter in the world. Tonight felt different, though. Harold couldn't put his finger on why, but something was off. Maybe it was the way that man in the expensive suit had been watching the security cameras instead of the games. Maybe it was the nervous energy of the woman who'd been nursing the same drink for 2 hours while scoping out the exits. Or maybe it was just the hypervigilance that he'd never quite managed to turn off, even after all these years. At 11:47 p.m., Harold was dealing the last hand before his break when he noticed them. 5 men, moving through the casino with the practiced coordination of a military unit. They looked like high rollers, expensive suits, confident walks, the kind of men who belonged in a place like the Belmont. But Harold recognized something in their movements, something that made his pulse quicken for the first time in years. These men were operators. The lead man was tall, blond, with the kind of build that came from serious military training. As he approached Harold's table, he made eye contact and smiled, the cold, predatory smile of a professional killer. Harold recognized the type immediately. Special forces, probably Navy SEALs gone private. The kind of men who sold their skills to the highest bidder. "Gentlemen, ladies," the blond man announced, his voice carrying easily across the casino floor. "This is a robbery." The casino erupted in chaos. Cocktail waitresses screamed, elderly slot machine players scrambled for cover, and security guards reached for weapons they'd never had to draw in anger. The 5 robbers moved with military precision, taking control of key positions, herding civilians into groups, establishing fields of fire. Harold's table was in the center of it all. Marcus Wellington III was crying, actually crying, as he cowered under the blackjack table. Amanda Cross had fainted. Victor Petrov was muttering prayers in Russian. James Morrison was hyperventilating into a cocktail napkin. "Nobody moves, nobody dies," the blonde leader announced. "We're here for the casino's money, not yours. Stay calm, do what you're told, and you'll all go home tonight." Harold sat perfectly still, his hands flat on the felt table, his expression unchanged. To everyone watching, he looked like a terrified old man frozen in shock. But inside, Harold Chen was gone. In his place sat Agent Harrison Chen, CIA Special Activities Division, and he was very much awake. The leader noticed Harold and walked over, his weapon casually pointed in Harold's direction. "You speak English, old man?" "Yes, sir," Harold replied, his voice shaky and afraid. "Please, I have grandchildren." The leader laughed. "Relax, Grandpa. Just sit there and be quiet, and nobody gets hurt." He turned to one of his men. "Rodriguez, get the manager. Tell him we want access to the vault. 5 minutes or people start dying." As Rodriguez headed toward the casino offices, Harold assessed the situation with the cold calculation of a trained operative. 5 hostiles, all armed with automatic weapons. Professional movement, good positioning, solid tactical awareness. They'd done this before, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd dismissed him completely. Harold's hand moved slowly toward what everyone assumed was his glasses case. It was actually something very different. A custom-made case that contained items he'd hoped never to need again. The case had been a gift from his CIA handler, a just-in-case measure for an agent who was supposed to disappear but might someday need to resurface. Inside the case was a modified .22 pistol, compact enough to hide but deadly accurate in the right hands. There was also a small device that looked like a hearing aid, but was actually a short-range communications scrambler. And there were 2 small glass vials containing a fast-acting sedative that could be deployed as an aerosol. The leader was focused on the vault access, coordinating with his team through nearly invisible earpieces. The other 4 robbers were positioned around the casino floor, controlling the crowd, but not paying particular attention to the scared old dealer at table 7. Harold made his decision. Moving with a speed that defied his apparent age, Harold stood up, drew his concealed weapon, and put 2 rounds center mass into the nearest robber before anyone even realized he'd moved. The man dropped without a sound. The leader spun toward Harold, his weapon coming up, but Harold was already moving. 3 years of dealing blackjack had kept his hands steady and his reflexes sharp. His third and fourth shots took down the robber near the slot machines. "Contact front," the leader shouted, his military training kicking in. But he was shouting to men who were already dead or dying. Harold rolled behind the blackjack table as automatic weapons fire chewed up the felt where he'd been standing. Marcus Wellington III was screaming now, a high-pitched wail that would have been funny under different circumstances. The leader and his 2 remaining men tried to establish a crossfire, but Harold had already deployed the communication scrambler. Their coordinated tactics fell apart as their earpieces filled with static. Harold moved like a ghost, using the casino's layout to his advantage. 25 years ago, he'd memorized buildings like this in minutes. Sight lines, cover positions, escape routes. The skills came flooding back as if no time had passed at all. The 4th robber went down behind the roulette table, taken out by Harold's perfectly placed shot as the man tried to flank him. The 5th robber panicked, spraying automatic fire wildly across the casino, shattering mirrors and sending gamblers diving for cover. Harold ended it with a single shot that dropped the panicked gunman instantly. That left only the leader, who had taken cover behind the bar and was trying to figure out what had just happened to his perfectly planned operation. "Who are you?" the leader called out, his voice no longer confident. Harold stepped out from behind a poker table, his weapon trained on the bar. The scared old dealer was gone completely now. In his place stood someone the leader recognized, a professional killer, someone who moved with the deadly grace of a man who had done this before. Many times before. "I'm nobody special," Harold replied, his voice calm and steady. "Just a casino dealer." The leader tried one last desperate move, popping up from behind the bar with his weapon ready. He was fast, well-trained, and determined. He wasn't fast enough. Harold's final shot ended the robbery at exactly 11:52 p.m. In the silence that followed, Harold calmly walked back to his table, retrieved his glasses case, and straightened his dealer's vest. Around the casino, terrified gamblers slowly emerged from their hiding places, staring at the old man who had just saved their lives. "Security!" Harold called out in the same mild voice he used to announce card totals. "You might want to call an ambulance. And the police. There's been an incident." Casino security arrived 3 minutes later to find 5 dead robbers and 1 unflappable dealer calmly stacking chips that had been scattered during the firefight. The security chief, Tom Morrison, had worked at the Belmont for 12 years and thought he'd seen everything. "Harold," he said, staring at the carnage, "what the hell happened here?" "Armed robbery," Harold replied matter-of-factly. "I intervened." "You intervened? Against 5 armed men? By yourself?" Harold shrugged. "I got lucky." But luck didn't explain the precision of the shots. Luck didn't explain how an old man had moved like a special forces operator. Luck didn't explain how someone had turned a hopeless situation into a tactical masterpiece in under 5 minutes. The LVPD arrived 20 minutes later, led by Detective Sarah Martinez, a 15-year veteran who specialized in high-profile casino incidents. She'd investigated dozens of robberies, but nothing like this. "Mr. Chen," she said, reviewing the preliminary reports, "I need to understand what happened here. 5 armed, trained men attempted to rob this casino. All 5 are dead. You're telling me you shot them all?" "Yes, ma'am," Harold replied politely. "With what weapon?" "Our officers found a .22 pistol at your table. That's not exactly an assault rifle. It's what I had available. Detective Martinez studied Harold's face, looking for some sign that would explain the impossible scene around them. Mr. Chen, do you have any military training? Police experience? Security background? No, ma'am. I've been dealing blackjack here for 3 years. Before that? Harold paused for just a moment. I worked in import-export, international business. It wasn't technically a lie. The CIA did import and export things, just not the kind of things most people would recognize. Detective Martinez wasn't satisfied, but she also wasn't getting anywhere with her questioning. Harold Chen appeared to be exactly what he claimed to be, a quiet casino employee who had somehow performed a miracle. The security footage told a different story, though. When Martinez reviewed the tapes, she watched in amazement as the mild-mannered dealer transformed into a lethal weapon. The speed, the precision, the tactical awareness. It was like watching two different people. Run a full background check, she told her partner, Detective James Wong. I want to know everything about Harold Chen. This guy didn't learn to shoot like that dealing blackjack. The initial background check came back clean. Harold Chen, age 64, Chinese American, no criminal record, no military service, no police training. He'd worked at the Belmont for 3 years, lived quietly in a small apartment, had no known associates or family. But Detective Martinez had been a cop long enough to know when something didn't add up. She made some calls, reached out to federal contacts, asked about Harold Chen through channels that went beyond local databases. The response she got was immediate and troubling. Detective Martinez, this is Agent Sarah Coleman, FBI. I understand you're investigating Harold Chen in connection with a casino incident. That's right. 5 dead-armed robbers, taken out by a 64-year-old blackjack dealer. Something doesn't add up. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Detective, I need you to stop investigating Harold Chen immediately. This is now a federal matter. Federal? What are you talking about? This was a casino robbery in my jurisdiction. I can't give you details over the phone, but Mr. Chen's background involves matters of national security. Your investigation ends now. Detective Martinez stared at her phone after Agent Coleman hung up. In 15 years as a cop, she'd never been told to drop a case for national security reasons. Whatever Harold Chen's real story was, it was buried deep. The next morning, Harold arrived for his shift at the usual time, wearing the same quiet expression he'd worn for 3 years. The casino had been cleaned up, the bullet holes patched, the blood removed. To most observers, it was as if nothing had happened. But word had spread. Other dealers looked at Harold differently now. Security guards nodded with new respect. Even the high rollers who had previously ignored him completely now watched him with a mixture of fear and fascination. Marcus Wellington III, the tech billionaire who had called Harold slow just hours before the robbery, approached the blackjack table hesitantly. Harold, he said quietly, I wanted to thank you for what you did last night. You saved our lives? Harold looked up from his cards with the same mild expression he'd always worn. Just doing my job, Mr. Wellington. That wasn't part of your job. That was incredible. Where did you learn to do that? Harold dealt the cards with his usual steady rhythm. You pick things up over the years, sir. Will you be playing this evening? Wellington sat down at the table, but he was studying Harold's face intently. You're not really just a casino dealer, are you? Harold met his gaze for a moment, and Wellington saw something in those eyes that made him understand why 5 armed robbers had died so quickly. It was the look of someone who had seen and done things that most people couldn't imagine. "I'm exactly what I appear to be, Mr. Wellington," Harold said softly. "A man who deals cards for a living." But as the weeks passed, word continued to spread. The story of the casino dealer who had single-handedly stopped 5 armed robbers became legend in Las Vegas. Security companies tried to recruit Harold. Private military contractors called his apartment. Journalists wanted interviews. Harold declined them all. He just wanted to deal cards and be forgotten again. But some stories are too big to disappear, and some skills are too distinctive to hide forever. When Detective Martinez's federal contact finally cleared Harold's background for limited release, the truth was both simpler and more complicated than anyone had imagined. Harold Chen had indeed been a CIA operative, one of the agency's most successful deep-cover specialists. His import-export work had taken him to some of the most dangerous places on Earth, where he'd spent years living false identities so completely that sometimes he'd forgotten his real name. The Beijing operation that ended his career had been a joint CIA-NSA mission to extract a Chinese defector who claimed to have intelligence about nuclear weapons sales to terrorist organizations. The defector had been legitimate, but the extraction had been compromised from the beginning. Harold's entire 6-man team had walked into a trap. Harold himself had survived 8 months in Chinese military prison, enduring interrogation techniques designed to break the strongest minds. When the CIA finally negotiated his release, Harold Chen, the operative, was dead. In his place was a broken man who just wanted to disappear. The agency had honored that wish. Harold's record was classified, his identity buried, his past erased. As far as the world was concerned, Agent Harrison Chen had never existed. But skills like Harold's don't disappear with paperwork. Muscle memory, tactical instincts, and the ability to kill efficiently and without hesitation, these things become part of who you are. They wait quietly until the moment when ordinary life suddenly becomes extraordinary, and then they emerge as if no time has passed at all. 6 months after the robbery, Harold was still dealing blackjack at Table 7. The Belmont Casino had become something of a tourist destination. People came hoping to see the legendary dealer who had stopped 5 armed robbers with nothing but a concealed pistol and 3 years of pent-up reflexes. Harold remained polite but distant with the tourists. He dealt their cards, took their money, and gave nothing away about the man behind the mild exterior. But sometimes, late at night when the casino was quieter, regular players would catch glimpses of something else in his eyes. The look of someone who had lived a dozen different lives, who had walked through the valley of the shadow of death so many times that he no longer feared it, who had served his country in ways that would never be acknowledged or rewarded. Harold Chen dealt blackjack with the same steady hands that had once defused bombs in Beirut, the same calm demeanor that had once talked his way through KGB checkpoints in Moscow, the same sharp eyes that had once spotted assassins in crowded marketplaces in Bangkok. He was exactly what he appeared to be, a quiet casino employee who dealt cards for a living. He was also something else entirely, a reminder that in a world full of ordinary people living ordinary lives, there are sometimes extraordinary individuals walking among us, invisible until the moment when their particular skills are needed. And on those rare occasions when chaos erupts and normal people freeze in terror, these invisible guardians step forward and remind us that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight means revealing secrets that were supposed to stay buried forever. Harold Chen shuffled the cards and prepared for another hand. In Las Vegas, there was always another game, Always another chance to win or lose everything. But for the first time in 3 years, Harold felt like he might actually be living again, instead of just surviving. The house always wins, they say. But sometimes, when the stakes are high enough and the right person is holding the cards, even the house can be surprised by what's possible.